Speaking about the banking system, how are you feeling about it? How do you feel how the banking system has been performing through the pandemic and what the prospects are going forward for it?
The banking system has held up quite well. I think a lot of that is because the Fed has responded quickly and strongly to shore up markets at a moment when one or another, whether they were government securities or mortgages, were showing signs of stress. I think a big part of it is that the financial reforms after the crisis left our financial system in a much safer place. The fact that we have banks that have deep capital, the fact that we have transparency where regulators have a much better idea at what they're seeing. What we haven't seen, and this is where fiscal policy and monetary policy come together, is we haven't seen the massive defaults on loans and the massive failures of businesses that ultimately still has the potential of being a trigger event that could destabilize financial institutions. It's a full circle. That's one of the reasons it's so important that fiscal policy continue so that business can gradually get back to normal as we are in a full recovery. I think it's playing with fire to think we're done with that. I think the system has held up extremely well because of the reforms and because the Fed has managed it.
So how do you think consumers are approaching financial services these days? Obviously, one of the effects of the pandemic was that people could no longer walk into bank branches. And, in our business, in the mortgage business, people didn't want to show up at closings and exchange pieces of paper in a crowded room. How do you think consumer expectations have changed with respect to the financial system?
It's interesting that you asked that. I had a closing on not my property, but someone in my family's property about 3 weeks before the pandemic. And I can't imagine being in a room like that, for some time. So if the financial system had not been able to respond in a flexible way to meet the needs of the moment and the preferences that people have, things would have been much worse. Now, we started with a maturing platform of technology. And I think what we've seen is the major institutions, the traditional banks, accelerate their embrace of those practices. And it's a good thing that companies that weren't the traditional banks were developing those tools so that they're available to be used more broadly. They're not testing everything for the first time. Surely it's much broader. I've been in a bank precisely once in the last 6 months. And, that may be one more time than a lot of other people, and you can do most of your business, online or on the telephone. My observation just from personal experience is that the systems of older banks are having a little bit of a challenge dealing with all of this. They kind of seize up at moments and they fix it, but things get straightened out. I'm curious what the experience, I would imagine the experience at Blend, for example, has been smoother because it was built to run online. It was built to be a technology platform. I'm not sure if that's the case, but I certainly hope it is.
So we've got challenger banks out there, neobanks, banks that are really trying to leverage technology to create a very different kind of consumer experience and compete directly with very established financial institutions. What do you make of all that? Do you think that those challenger and neobanks are going to be successful? And do you think they're really going to disrupt the legacy institutions?
Well, there's no doubt that they're disrupting the legacy institutions. And I think some of it is helping the legacy institutions because they're seeing that they have to develop offerings that meet the needs that people are expressing a desire for when they go to some of the challenger institutions. So, competition actually can be a good thing in terms of helping to spur the evolution of pretty staid institutions. My concern in government and since has always been that we strike the right balance between providing a space for innovative technology, for innovative approaches, without suspending the normal concerns for safety and soundness and consumer protection. And how to find the right balance to do that without suffocating change and without exposing the system to risk and individuals to risk that we wouldn't do in the context of a traditional financial institution. And I think that's a work in progress. I think no one has a script for exactly how to do that. And I think a kind of a hard wall that you can't get beyond would be a mistake. We wouldn't see the kind of innovation we need. But relaxing standards to the point of saying, consumer protection doesn't matter anymore, safety and soundness doesn't matter anymore, that would be a mistake.
Yeah, what do you see as you look ahead, let's say 20 years? Do you see the banking industry being more and more consolidated in a smaller number? Or we've been seeing the decline in the number of banks for quite a long time now. Or do you see it actually potentially being even more diverse than it is today, given the number of new technology companies that are coming into the space?
There's no doubt that there's been a consolidation in traditional banking platforms, which I think will be accelerated by the easing of limits on the size of institutions in order to stay within a slightly less rigorous regulatory environment. Some of that is good, some of that is bad. If there are efficiencies where you can combine platforms and have things work better and cheaper and have less costs to banking customers, that's all a positive. If it eliminates the access to Main Street banking so that people who don't have a banking history, a financial history, have no way of getting in, it becomes bad. I think the challenge is going to be, how do we make sure that financial inclusion is not adversely affected by the concentration of banks? The community banks are a powerful force, and so they often are seen as just a lobbying interest. They also reflect a core value, which is that if the banker knows you, he's going to take it, or she is going to take a different risk than if you're just an anonymous customer. How do we get to the point where, through technology, through the different ways of underwriting, of knowing who a person is, we create the possibility of access to capital, for communities, and particularly communities of color, but for disadvantaged communities that are all too often locked out of the banking system now. Having a history of credit really helps. Figuring out how those people can have savings accounts and have lending history helps. Being flexible about what are the indicia of financial health also helps. Looking at paying your phone, your cell phone bill, your cable bill, your rent, things that are often not part of a traditional credit history. I put a lot of effort into this when I was at Treasury, because I view the unbanked population as being a real opportunity for the economy. That's where small businesses are created or can be created. But it's also a way of reducing inequality in our society. And the banking system cannot be seen, it cannot be seen as a system that keeps people down.
Well, just as the old saying goes that, why do people rob banks? Because that's where the money is. Why do bankers focus on affluent people? Because that's where the money is. I do think we need to create incentives for the banking system to serve low to moderate income people. And hopefully technology can help drive some of that. You mentioned a lot about people establishing credit history and how that can be really beneficial to them. I understand that the Biden team has been talking about essentially creating a government-sponsored credit bureau instead of the big three credit bureaus. Essentially have the government provide that service and perhaps consider a wider range of data and determining the creditworthiness of people. What do you think about that idea?
So I'm not familiar with that specific proposal, but I can tell you when I was at Treasury, one of the innovations that we pressed on was developing an alternative FICO that would look at more characteristics, all of which could be statistically correlated with a high degree of financial soundness. So it wasn't a question of we want you to lower credit standards. We said we want to look at other ways of measuring credit worthiness so that you can make good underwriting decisions on a broader population. If it's an extension of that, I obviously pushed that and thought it was a good idea when I was doing so. Well, who does it, whether it's done by a government agency or an independent party, is actually less important in my view than that it be well designed to be a good measure of financial capacity and a full measure. I think there's room for competition in this space.
So some would say that both parties are really captured by or have been captured by the most extreme elements of their parties. The right on the side of the Republicans and the left on the side of the Democrats. First, do you think that's true? And is a potential path forward for there to be the creation of a third party, a more mainstream or middle of the road party? Do you think that's possible? And do you think there'd be appetite for that?
I don't think that there's equal responsibility on both sides. I think that the radicalization in the Republican Party has taken over the direction of the party. The far left in the Democratic Party is one of many views that's balanced in. And some of the ideas that they're advocating are the same as the ideas that are being advocated by people who are not at the far left. And the decisions we made, in the middle, I think. The Republican Party, since the Tea Party, has moved in a very extreme direction. I have many friends and people that I respect who are traditional Republicans. We can disagree on countless issues, but I never would question their intelligence or their patriotism, and I would never have a challenge working with them. I don't know where those people go in the modern Republican Party. And I think that's one of the reasons you see things like the Lincoln Project, where you have, leaders of Republican administrations and from Congress, saying, we can't abide by where our party has gone. I don't know how you fix that. The primary system gives a majority that's radicalized an awful lot of power to define the party. Again, I don't mean to sound oversimplistic, but it's going to take Republican elected officials willing to take stands that might cost them their seats, that might make it impossible to get reelected. Leadership isn't about getting reelected. Leadership is about defining what needs to be and how people need to get there. And I don't think we've seen a lot of that because of fear of being primaried, fear of not coming back. When I worked on the Hill, I worked for somebody who was willing to say it's not worth coming back if the price is selling my soul. And he'd go to the factions in the party that might have been able to undo him and say, look, this is what we need to do. He never got defeated. I look at Republican speakers who kowtowed to the extreme in their party. They were short-lived. So I don't even know that it's a durable way of maintaining power. It's certainly not a durable way of maintaining character and leadership.
So Jack, what advice would you give to somebody who was thinking about a career in government service today? Would you encourage your own kids to be a part of government service? It's been an amazing run for you, an incredible career. Your ability to influence things has been remarkable, but would you advise somebody today that that's how they should be thinking about their life?
I teach at a school of public policy, and I advise students regularly that there's no higher calling and that they should get on the field and learn the system even if the environment is unpleasant. So that is advice that I give. I have two children, and one of my children has gone into public service. And, has her share of challenges to deal with in the public space. I'm very proud of the work she does, but it takes a thick skin. I mean, people who don't like what you do, get right at who you are and what you are. My advice to people is go in with your eyes open as you progress and do things that are more in the public eye. There is certainly the environment out there that means you might have some experiences that are unpleasant. But I go back to where I started. If you want to leave an imprint on the larger events of the country and the world, the place to do that is in public policy. There are enormously satisfying things to do in business, in academia, in all kinds of other pursuits. But the area where you actually are given responsibility to make decisions on big, big things is in public policy.
So, Jack, thank you for this great conversation. I must say that, for myself, one of the great pleasures I get is being able to talk to some really extraordinary people. And I can't think of a more pleasurable conversation, one where I've learned as much as I have in this time, spending time with you. So thank you for that. And for our audience, I'd say, please follow Blend on YouTube so you can see who our next guests are going to be. And I hope you'll tune in for future episodes. So again, Jack, thanks so much. It was great talking with you.
Pleasure to be with you, Tim. Stay well and stay safe.